Gospel according to Luke chapter 12.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus encouraged disciples to invest their hearts and live fully into God's reign. Instead of facing life with fear, those who know God's generosity are always ready to receive from God and give to others. Jesus said, "Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give alms. Make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Be dressed for action and have your lamps lit. Be like those who are waiting for their master to return from the wedding banquet, so that they may open the door for him as soon as he comes in and knocks. Blessed are those slaves who the master finds alert when he comes. Truly I tell you, he will fasten his belt and have them sit down to eat, and he will come and serve them. If he comes during the middle of the night or near dawn and finds them so, blessed are those slaves. But know this, if the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to God.
Came about in my mind about the interplay of words faith, hope, courage, and curiosity. In Hebrews, as was read, you heard faith said about 5 times. Do not be afraid, we heard from the Genesis and Luke. I like to try to put that in the positive. Luther was pretty good at that. He would take these things that says, do not be afraid, or do not do this, or do... Because, like a little kid, if you tell a little kid not to do something, it's the first thing they do. So, I like the idea of be of courage. Have courage. Hope is expressed in Psalms to keep them alive in the time of famine. We praise our hope in you. And then after reading Genesis, I read that and I go, well, what about this Eleazar of Damascus? Boy, he really got gypped out of an inheritance. Here he was working for all that time, and then all of a sudden Abram and Sarah decide to have a baby, and then there was probably quite a bit of sizable inheritance. Eleazar, I have a problem pronouncing it, but Eleazar means my God is my help. Eleazar of Damascus, the way the terms go, there could be a corruption in that in the Hebrew, but then it was one commentator talked about that. It was someone who has learned virtue from a master in teachings, and then also has taught others and taught others those virtues. Other accounts, they're not in the Bible, but there's other writings, other Hebrew writings, other sources that talk about Eleazar. He was with Abram at the time. I forget when he made the name change, so I'll just say Abraham. With Abraham when he went to go get Lot, rescue Lot from his lot. And then also, he was there, his name also in the Hebrew, these are just sort of sidetracked. I thought they were kind of interesting. I was curious about them. But I ran across the numeric, the Hebrews had a thing about numbers, but the numbers in his name equals the number that was in Abraham's army, which I thought that was kind of either a coincidence or the writers kind of put that in there to show the importance of him. He was also, in some of the writings, was one of the people that went with Abraham when he took Isaac up to be bound and thrown on a bunch of fire and then sacrificed. Also, it's in some of the writings that he also, after that didn't happen, he went out and looked for a wife for Isaac and found Rebekah. And then this was kind of not to his best interest because he was hoping that Isaac might marry his own daughter, and so that didn't happen. So that quenched his hope for his daughter to marry. And then in the reading it said he was born under the household, but there were some other accounts that Eleazar was from the court, or maybe the son of Nimrod. And it was given to him after there was a confrontation between Abraham and Nimrod back in the old country. And he was part of the Canaanite nation, part of the Canaanite curse. It's kind of interesting looking at another little rabbit trail is Nimrod. In the Bible, it has him as being the grandson, well, the son of Cush and the grandson of Noah, and then he was the one that built the Tower of Babel. But then that didn't really correlate with Abraham. Other writings that there was a Nimrod about that time, and there was this conflict between him and Abraham. And then there wasn't anything specifically found about him that could correlate with Nimrod. But then there was some accounts of a king that was very vicious, very cruel, and this was probably the contrast between Abraham and Nimrod. Now, I think it's also kind of comical that Nimrod kind of meant good hunter and stuff like that, and then we've kind of taken Nimrod as becoming an imbecile. And I looked a little bit at that, and I ran across a thing where I guess Elmer Fudd in the Bugs Bunny was a good hunter, I think they called it Nimrod, because he was not too competent. It's kind of interesting how Nimrod now has gone from being this awful king to an idiot. Probably poetic justice at the time. But then this poor guy who got out of the inheritance and his daughter didn't get married, it's kind of odd. Why would he be the heir of Abraham? And it was interesting, they did find some indications that back in the day, they would have a contract with a slave or with somebody that was, if the family was childless, that person would then take care of them in their, when they were elderly and maybe doting, and then also agreed to marry them. And then in those contracts, there was a clause also that did protect and did describe the rights and duties of the individual, of the slave, of the person in the contract, if there was an heir to be born. So he was taken care of by these provisions addressing that occurrence. But in sort of some of the history, Eleazar had become the prototype of loyalty, selflessness, fulfilling the master's wishes even to his own disadvantage. But what's interesting is even though he was a slave and even though he didn't get his inheritance, he got his freedom. He was emancipated by Abraham. In fact, Abraham gave him the kingdom of Bashan, and he reigned under the name of Og. And then also in some of the traditions, he is one of the few that entered paradise alive. Quite a recompense. The phrase Eleazar call is the call for the bride of Christ, the church, to rise up and go to the bridegroom, to Christ. I thought that was an interesting phrase attributed to him, for us to rise up to follow Jesus. And then also when I read the readings, I don't know why I reached immediately, but there was this book called Reframing Hope by Carol Merritt. It just kind of clicked with me, because we have, these are people who have had hopes. Abraham has had hopes. In her last chapter, Hope in the Desert, she talks about Israel and Ishmael. Well, there's a couple here. Ishmael is going to be the heir. And then out of the blue, as they're young, there's a dispute between and forced to leave, and it's kind of interesting. Hagar was a slave, forced to have a child by a master. In this day and age, we call that human trafficking. But she was driven out into the desert with some water, there pretty much to die. That's what she thought. That's what was happening. In the parched landscape with the parched lips, the water had run out. She sees her son, he looks at her, they're together. She's probably holding him, touching his parched lips. He's dying, he's fading away. So she cries. She's feeling helpless, hopeless, cries out to God, "Don't let me see my son die." She walked away from him, stepped away from him. Don't let me see. That was her prayer. Don't let me see him die. Her opinion, she left him under the bush to die. But then an angel appeared and said, "Do not be afraid." There's that "do not be afraid" again. Have courage. The psalmist talked about a famine. Hope even if there's a famine, to stay alive. Her eyes were open. God did make a promise to Abraham, and she gets a taste of it with her son. A promise. She's part of the numerous inheritors that will be as numerous as the stars in the sky. She's part of that covenant too, and she sees a well, and she sees water. And they survive, and he does become a great nation. So even though you have this, what looks like probably collateral damage from Abraham's actions and Isaac coming up there, you have these spectacular things that happen to those people. Even though that they're in a state of hopelessness, helplessness, God intervened. Moses wandered around in the desert for milk and honey. There's a lot of hope in the desert. The author goes on and kind of makes an analogy. There are streams that flow in the desert. Spiritual communities are responding to the needs of the people. That's the current well. That's the current water. God has given us faith, opening our eyes to God's work of creating caring communities, of addressing people's shattered lives as hopelessness, helplessness people. There is water. There is a well. We are that water well. We are a caring community to address these shattered lives that are seeking wholeness, seeking shalom, peace, wholeness. Hope on the horizon. Look to the stars and see what God can do. And we're part of it. Not only hope on the horizon, but when you take a look at the gospel today, the Father, a loving parent, good pleasure to give a gift. To give a gift for us, the kingdom, God's kingdom, kingdom of love, kingdom where the work of God is done. Jesus assures us of this kingdom. It is inaugurated by Christ. This is a blessed assurance. Yes, the kingdom is here. It's the kingdom to grab. The kingdom is at hand. It isn't a kingdom in conflict, though, here. It isn't a conflict with other kingdom of selfishness, greed, get it while you can, look out for number one, kingdom of anxiety, the kingdom of being possessed by your own possessions, the insecurity, of fracturedness, and the hopelessness. The kingdom of God is in conflict with that kingdom. And then whenever you follow the Messiah, and with that kingdom that's inaugurated by him, you invite this conflict. It will be there. It is an act of earthly faith to live in the reality of God's kingdom while it is contested. What is truly worthy? What does have value? What brings healing? What brings wholeness? The kingdom is a real possibility because of Christ. There's a security in the reign of the kingdom. Even though the world wants to crucify, there's a vindication, exaltation. There's a resurrection. He will come again. This beautiful kingdom is here to be expressed, to be faithful to. So let the party begin. Be faithful, be curious. Amen.
Amen.